All right, well, welcome back, and welcome back to our speakers. We have until 3:50, so we have approximately 15 minutes to pursue a series of questions, so we'll have to keep it within a fairly tight framework. But let me begin with some of the questions are directed to specific speakers, and some are more general. First, for Professor Shannon French. The questioner asks, have you or anyone else at the Naval Academy explored the possibility that there might be a difference in either leadership or ethics in services emphasizing systems like ships and planes versus those revolving around people, namely Army and Marines?
Very interesting. First of all, very good question. And I have a two-part answer, which I'll keep short because of time constraints. Part one is to say, in a way, we have resisted that. And the reason we have resisted that approach is that, again, in choosing not to go the route of business and management that we saw happening in some of the other services, we wanted to focus on the identity of the service member as part of an organization that has a legacy, that does have a code, that gives you a personal identity that you would not wish to violate, that you would feel personally ashamed if you violated. And the worry is that if we drift too far from that kind of identity into a more mechanistic description of the role of the individual, that could be dangerous, that could lead to a kind of maybe site-specific ethics that we wouldn't want to see. But having said that, we have realized that in the courses that we teach that do have these two-part and co-taught elements where it's partly the military officer who's really been there and done that and partly the civilian philosopher, we try to make sure that we give a range of examples, because you do have to talk about specific kinds of threats to the ethics of the individual that arise in different contexts that are simply not going to translate or be relevant to everyone. So if you just did a one-size-fits-all, you would have a problem. And just final word on that, we have capstone courses at the Academy for each of the specific service selections that the midshipmen are going into. And as I was leaving the Academy, there was an even stronger effort underway to make those have greater ethics components that did address specific ethics issues that only arise in those particular directions of the service.
Father Hehir, can I comment just briefly?
Yes.
And I just want to amplify a bit about the context. Dr. French is talking about a group of students ages 18 to 22 or 23. And that identity, focus, and character development element is really crucial at that stage. At a place like where I teach at NDU, these are people in their mid-40s up to maybe mid-50s who are at the final senior level educational opportunity. So there is an emphasis at that level on organizational ethics. In fact, my colleague, Dr. Al Pierce, co-teaches every semester and has for 6 semesters in a row with General Dick Myers, the former chairman of the Joint Staff. They co-teach a class on ethics and organization.
One member of the audience asked if Professor Feldman and Commander Granfield would want to talk to each other a bit more about the ethics and the practice of engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan at the various levels at which they have experienced it.
Could I ask you a question? Would
Sure.
that be okay? Can you think of a concrete example of what struck you as some kind of an ethical dilemma that you faced in the PRT context when you're commanding the PRT?
An ethical dilemma. Wow. I don't know if I ever thought of something like that. I mean, when you were talking about, the fact that in a lot of cases the military is out there imposing kind of what our mission construct is upon the local government and making decisions based on that, I would say we tried really hard in our case not to do that, because I truly did not want to create, United States in Nangarhar province, because they had a system. It wasn't always so effective, and it wasn't always, what we wanted to see it. And so, yeah, I mean, the dilemma is, okay, on one hand, we're here to try to make a central government that's strong, but Afghanistan historically has never had one. So then how do you work within the code? And that's why we really focused on the code of the Pashtuns and how they did business. And so looking at the...
Can you give an example of that? How did you use Pashtunwali to...
we did what was called the Nanawati ceremony, because Nanawati means basically sanctuary of last resort. And it's a code used when somebody literally has a knife at your throat and says, I'm going to kill you. Why should I give you sanctuary? Why should I give you forgiveness? And what was happening with the Marines, the maneuver unit, was getting IED'd down in the south in 3 southern districts, Kogiani, Peshawar-Gam, and Shirzad, but they're all Kogiani tribe. And so the Marine commander and myself went down there and with the deputy sub-governor and the chief prosecutor from those areas with lambs and sheep and rice, enough food to feed the village. And basically myself and the Marine commander said, here, we're guests here. You've invited us here, and we don't want to be perceived as the Soviets. So we're asking for sanctuary of last resort. And so we're bringing you the lambs and the sheep and the rice in hopes that we can, start from a clean slate and work together towards the future, towards your future. We did it in Peshawar, we did it in Shirzad, because Kogiani district was the problem district.
Did they buy the idea that you were their guests?
Oh yeah, and in fact in the end they came up with a neighborhood watch kind of organization where one village would say, we're going to take responsibility here, we're going to take responsibility here, we're going to take responsibility there, and we saw a significant decrease in IEDs against the Marines. So,
I'm sure there's a lot more in this discussion.
Yeah,
Professor
absolutely.
Feldman, do you have anything further you wanted to expand on?
No, let's let other people's questions
All right,
come in.
okay.
But actually, I just wanted to know, because you mentioned it, why are you wearing the green scarf? You said you were going to tell us. When we get
the reason why I wore the green scarf is because when I first arrived at the PRT, the governor, my chief translator, Najib, who's from Nangarhar, the director of women's affairs, and several of the women came to me early on and asked me if I would mind wearing a scarf, because they thought it was very important to the people of Nangarhar to show respect. And so after much consultation with the key leaders in the province, including women, I made the decision that I was going to be respectful and that I would wear a scarf. I chose the color green because I wanted to send a message to the elders in the district. It wasn't because it matched my uniform, as many people think. I mean, green represents Islam and very, sacred things in Islam. And so I was sending a message, basically, that I was, understanding that it's an important context. And so at the end, when I left, and I did that in public, I wore the headscarf. When I was meeting privately with the provincial leadership, I did not. When I was out in the districts, many times I didn't have my scarf. I actually just wore my floppy hat. Because again, it's being respectful of covering my head. And at the end, when I was leaving, the very senior mullah, who was the provincial council chair, who had the most votes, who absolutely hated the PRT, hated the U.S., hated everything that we stood for, actually got up and spoke at my farewell, which I was shocked. He said, I don't necessarily like the U.S., I don't necessarily like the PRT, but Lynda's shown us respect, and for that we are, as a community, grateful. So,
This question is a general question to the chaplains, I gather. What percentage of the chaplaincy corps is made up of women, and are there unique challenges women face in serving those in uniform or engaging with NGOs or clerics on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, this will probably vary from service to service, both questions, ratio and role. I'm just trying to do the math in my head. It's for the Army chaplaincy, it's less than 10% are female clergy. 4% active duty. And it's probably lower in the reserve component because most of the reserve, well, half of the reserve is made up of the National Guard, which are almost all maneuver units. And we don't have that many women in those striker brigades. So 5% or less. The role of women in negotiation and outreach on the ground is something I really can't comment other than to say that most of the women who are now entering the chaplaincy are assigned at the battalion level. We just don't have a large crop of female chaplains that have been in the ranks long enough that they're really typically given the responsibility to do that kind of liaison. I'm sure there are cases where that's been done, but I don't know what their experience has been like.
Speaking for the Navy side, the only chaplains that, we had a couple of female chaplains when I was in Iraq. They generally weren't encouraged to go outside the wire, and it was generally thought that that interface with the local imams would be left to the male chaplains. The only females that did go outside the wire were the medical people, because one of the ironies is that only female physicians can attend females in the Arab world, which is really more Bedouin than it is Islamic. And one of the problems over there is the complexity of the blending of the Bedouin culture with the Islamic culture. There are some times when they put them together and they don't belong together. The honor killings are not Islamic, they're Bedouin. There's all kinds of other Bedouin things that go on that are really counterproductive in their society, but they're not willing to give up at this point. As far as percentage of chaplains in the Navy that are women, I believe it's around 11 to 12%. And we have some female chaplains. We have one who's in charge of the management of the whole personnel process out of the chief's office. And we have our head recruiter is a female chaplain, and we have them in some other significant strategic positions as well. So they've been around. We've had women chaplains. I think the first military chaplain, female military chaplain, was a Navy chaplain, and I think we go back to 1970, a little after maybe 1975, 74. We've had women chaplains. We've had them at sea since 1986, 87. But we've had them in the mid-70s, mid to late 70s is when we first came in.
I've got two questions that are similar, and I'm not directed to anyone in particular, so let me ask them together. First, since chaplains are expected to be the moral and ethical staff officers in their units, how can current chaplains in training best prepare themselves in the academy to bring the best of the academy to their commands and soldiers? On the other hand, the second question, given the range of faiths and the range of qualifications and education in the chaplains corps, how do you ensure that chaplains are qualified to teach and advise not only on matters of faith, but on matters of ethics? What could the chaplain schools and other institutions do to better prepare chaplains for their role? I mean, I take it almost anyone on the panel would have room to comment on that.
Well, speaking from the perspective of one who's responsible for training new chaplains, we have a retired Navy captain who is an expert in ethics who teaches at the Naval Academy, who comes up to Newport for a 3-day period of ethics training for our basic course chaplain.
He was one of those SMEs I was talking about.
Yeah.
Captain Rubel, right?
Captain Rubel, yes, excellent. And he's known far and wide in other publications and other communities, but that's the primary basic one. We also have some continuing training. We have what we call an annual professional development training course, and we deal with different topics. As Dr. Shannon said, we had one on the just war theory and ethics in war and that. We've had others on ethics. We also have a postgraduate program for chaplains in ethics for those who want to pursue postgraduate studies, funded postgraduate studies, and we'll send some for ethics training. We have a chaplain right now at the Navy's Personal Professional Development Center in Damnick, Virginia, whose primary reason for being there is to be the ethical input for their curricula. We don't have the same kind of specialization that the Army has, and that's one of the problems we're dealing with and maybe moving toward. We've always been generalists on the basis that we can then go anywhere to do anything, but the world is becoming less accommodating to that. So we're trying to be more accommodating in terms of getting more specialized training and more thoroughly prepare chaplains in various areas. But that's something that right now is in process in the old grand scheme of the strategic plan for the Navy Chaplain Corps for the future. And
Colonel Wester, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I'll comment on chaplain candidates and seminary students. I would say don't presume that soldiers that gather in front of you in a classroom like this for a class on ethics are uninterested in the topic. Presume that they really want to be engaged. Don't be afraid to talk to them about principles of just war. In a way, making those kind of offering those kind of mistaken thoughts about your audience misses the mark. One of the most engaging conversations I had was an article I did on preemption and just war, which I published with a little bit of concern about how this would play out, because I published in, I think, 2004, and then the next month I was asked by our 3-star commander to stand up in front of a whole room full of people and explain my position, and I knew they were interested, but it was, I guess the point I'm saying is, as you enter into the ranks of the chaplaincy, you've got something to offer in the area of ethics. So you need to learn some of the basic building blocks about ethical principles and the military art. On how the military prepares Army chaplains in ethics, Chaplain Ken Bush is here. He's the director of training for the Army Chaplain School, counterpart to Chaplain Simpson. He could talk about the chaplaincy training across the career field. We send 4 to 6 students every year for advanced civilian schooling for a graduate degree in ethics, and that's the pool of people we send as ethics instructors to the infantry and other schools.
To keep within our framework, this will have to be the last question. Commander Granfield, the question is directed to you, but others may wish to say something also. In Iraq, the provincial teams were established over most of the country, in addition to the embedded provincial teams. Often it seemed that the missions of the land army military units and those of the provincial teams were in conflict. Did you experience this in Afghanistan? If so, how did you resolve the conflicts?
May I just say,
Yes.
I found a way to shorten the segue to our debrief group, so please carry on with the 7 minutes.
Okay.
And actually, I did have a comment about a question on the women chaplains meeting with mullahs. I met every month with the mullahs in our community, and it was very important. So I would just say probably shouldn't exclude women, chaplains from going out and meeting with mullahs, because I think it's very, very important for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, I had a maneuver battalion co-located in the province with me. It was a Marine infantry unit. I had 3 different ones. They rotated through in 3 different times. And so, yeah, there were conflict. I mean, because their mission and my mission sometimes were opposed to each other, but we always found a way to try to complement each other's priorities. And for instance, whenever the Marines got IED'd, and they frequently did, where the PRT did not, because the community saw the difference between the maneuver guys going in and kicking in doors in the southern districts and the PRT going down and working with the district leadership. But we always would go to the governor's palace and bring in the district leadership and try to get to the bottom of why the Marines were getting IED'd. Additionally, we had a system where their civil affairs officer would come over to the PRT once a week and bring with him the requirements for the Commander's Emergency Response Program money, the CERP money, in order for him to do projects in support of the Marines. And so we made sure that those were nested then with what the requirements of were with the provincial leadership. And so trying to create synergy and work together, because at the end of the day, I mean, we were there for the same purposes. But commander to commander, there was a lot of times where we just had to sit down and resolve issues, because the nature of our missions sometimes didn't complement each other. Additionally, we actually had his Marine company living on the PRT, and so his captain would sit in my nightly updates to really understand and take back what we were doing at the PRT to his leadership. And then also, too, we had over 376 visitors the year that I was there, and so that's a lot on top of your mission already. So we'd find ways to send my USAID rep and my Department of State rep out to the districts where his company was moving to so that they could go check on their projects and do things. So we definitely tried to complement, but it wasn't always hunky-dory.
Okay, there are only two more questions anyway. The first is to Dr. French. What are the academies doing right in terms of teaching a warrior's code of honor to today's service members, and what is missing and what can be done better?
Oh, that question. Well, first, on what they're doing right, I think that what I referred to earlier, the embracing of the philosophy and psychology elements is a fantastic thing and has been very successful. I also think that the use of literature, and I mentioned the one student who had done the presentation using World War I poetry, but in the courses that I taught and that others teach now at the Naval Academy, we also used things like Homer's Iliad, Shakespeare's Henry V. This is not frivolous when you're talking about the Warrior's Code, because one of the things it does is it gives you a window into the mind of the warrior that you don't get from reading drier, more academic literature. And so it allows students to identify in this way and to imagine themselves in situations a bit better than they might get from just reading ethics cases. And sort of following along those lines, I think the other thing that we're doing very well, which I did mention slightly in my talk, is this exploration of what war does to the humanity of the individuals who are involved in war. And so there's been a conversation that emerged while I was at the Academy, and is certainly going on still, about the effects of killing on the individual who does the killing, on the effects of surviving war, and the warrior transitions piece that we're going to hear more about this evening, of how do you take warriors out of that experience and reintegrate them into society. So I think all of that is very good, and I think using the old language, if you will, that I mentioned of honor and even shame is very good and very powerful, and shouldn't be abandoned due to some, I think, somewhat misconceived ideas about that being hazing or something else. Hazing is bad, but it's very separate from a healthy kind of reintegrative shaming that does identify what it means to cross a line and gives you a way back. Now, that said, there are problems. There's always problems. The negatives are that because you have flawed humans in any organization, and you have this age group that was referenced who are very sharp and are looking for hypocrisy, you have problems that arise when the leaders who rotate very frequently, do not completely always buy in to the idea of the Warrior's Code, and do not always live those values themselves, and in the worst case scenario, scoff at them. So they pay lip service on the one hand, but the signal that's sent is, yeah, we make you learn that stuff, you have to check that box, but it's not real. Now, I'm happy to say in the 11 years I was there, we didn't have that many leaders at the higher levels of the administration at the Academy that fit that description, but I'm sad to say we did have some. And we had some that really, you could actually see the effect ripple through the brigade of midshipmen. When we had a leader who had a negative attitude about the reality of a code or the reality of ethics, and who dismissed it and scoffed at it, the midshipmen would become cynical, and it was very hard to build back from that. I always say that, it's not my expression, but I borrow the expression, that a cynic is a disillusioned idealist. We get kids who come to the Naval Academy because, for the most part, they are idealistic, and they want to be part of something that challenges them to hold to a code. If their senior leadership says, oh, that's all hogwash, it can devastate them, and building them back up is very difficult. So that is the hard part, is making sure everybody's on board, the command climate is positive and not corrupting, so that they don't get mixed messages, because you can't pull the wool over the eyes of kids that age. They're too
Final
sharp.
question. It was mentioned in the presentations that chaplains must be endorsed by a faith group. Does that include, for example, atheists and agnostics or other religious groups that are not mainline groups. Does that happen, and is there any, the question asked, is there any political pressure to, I guess, bring those latter perspectives into the chaplaincy?
We have an interesting saying in the military, that takes place at a higher pay grade. The whole issue of the endorsing agent really belongs to the Secretary of Defense. They determine who are recognized endorsing agents. A couple of pieces that have to go into that is there has to be some kind of organization and an accrediting body. While we have had, and usually the short answer and the most effective answer is the lay leadership program, where we actually have a command-authorized individual representing that particular faith group to conduct worship for that faith group. But that usually is on the basis where there's very, very few of that number, and it's impractical either to assign a chaplain there or there are none available at all. Case in point, when I got to Iraq, there had been a pagan lay leader, and kind of in violation of our own rules, it was one of the religious program specialists, one of the enlisted folks. He was the pagan lay leader, but he was officially endorsed by, or approved by the command. And that's really the way we handle a number of those issues, where if there isn't a formal endorsing agent associated that the Department of Defense recognizes, then there's not an ability for that organization to provide chaplains. And the other side of that is a lot of those. We actually have had a couple of Wicca lay leaders who have letters from different Wicca church groups authenticating their education in that particular version of Wicca. But in order to really get it to the higher level, and that's really what the point is, it has to be raised to the higher awareness of the Department of Defense before they'll engage. The other side of that, though, is how we've traditionally been involved in a lot of that, and that's that there is a continuing process, and it really goes up to the Chaplains Resource Board, which is actually an organization of all of the chaplains from all of the branches, Army, Navy, and Air Force, who meet on a regular basis. And that is, if the need becomes so noticeable and so prevalent, then there is a push from our side to say, isn't there an organization out there that can endorse somebody? Okay.
That finishes the questions from the audience, so I want to thank our speakers and to thank the audience and bring this to a close.